So the geographical cure, I mean, we've all entertained the fantasy at some point, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's so common.
Yeah, it's this persistent, really seductive idea that if the architecture of your life becomes, too suffocating.
Right, if things just get too heavy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if your relationships curdle, or your career feels like a trap, or even if you just simply cannot stand the person you see in the mirror, you get this idea that you can just pack a bag, change your coordinates, and effectively reset your soul.
Just hit the reset button.
Right. You step off a train in some remote coastal village, inhale the salt air, and immediately shed your accumulated flaws. Like you just emerge as this peaceful, reflective, fundamentally decent human being.
Yeah, and it's an incredibly resilient illusion because it relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of where our baggage actually lives.
Oh, for sure.
We treat our neuroses, our vanities, our cruelties like heavy coats that we can simply leave on a coat rack in the city. But the terrifying reality, of course, is that the architecture we're trying to escape isn't the city.
No, it's not the job either.
Right, the architecture is our own mind.
Yeah. And today we're bringing you into a story about what happens when that illusion of the geographical cure completely collapses under the crushing weight of a human ego.
It is a spectacular collapse.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're spending our time unpacking Iris Murdoch's Booker Prize-winning novel, The Sea.
And to navigate this text, we're drawing on some exceptionally rich source material.
Yeah, we have a lot to get through.
We do. We have extensive excerpts directly from the novel itself, which is entirely composed of the memoir/diary entries of its protagonist, Charles Arrowby. And crucially, we're framing our analysis around this really comprehensive introduction by the poet and critic Mary Kinsey.
Which is just brilliant.
It is. Kinsey provides this definitive philosophical and artistic lens through which to view Murdoch's work. She dissects exactly how this novel operates as a psychological pressure cooker.
So the mission for this deep dive is to really map the terrifying gravity of the unchecked ego. We're looking at a man who retreats into absolute isolation to escape his past.
Right.
Only to find that when you strip away the distractions of society, the demons you're running from aren't, waiting out there in the dark.
No, they're sitting right there in the room with you.
Exactly. And as this novel demonstrates so masterfully, those internal demons do not stay quiet. They demand a stage.
Oh, they always do.
Yeah, and they will project themselves violently onto the physical world if they're left unexamined. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the premise and our protagonist.
Right. Charles Arrowby.
Yes, Charles Arrowby. He's in his 60s, and he's this immensely famous, celebrated, and notoriously ruthless theater director.
I mean, the British press has characterized him as a power-crazed monster, basically.
Literally a theatrical tartar. He's a man who has spent his entire adult life dictating reality to other people, just arranging human beings on a stage to satisfy his own aesthetic demands.
But Charles decides he is completely done with the theater. He announces his retirement, buys this sprawling, creepy, isolated house on the really treacherous northern coast of England.
This place called Shrough End.
Exactly, Shrough End. And he declares his intention to write his memoirs. His stated goal, in his own words, is to, quote, learn to be good.
Which sounds nice, right? It sounds like the setup for a quiet, meditative redemption story.
Right, like he's going to find his inner peace.
But what actually unfolds is a slow-motion psychological horror. Instead of finding peace, he is beset by literal sea monsters.
Yeah, the quiet retreat is invaded by vengeful figures from his past.
And he eventually kidnaps a childhood sweetheart,
Yeah.
locking her in a room in his house out of this totally deranged sense of chivalry.
Now, if we just list the plot points like that, it sounds almost melodramatic.
It sounds like a soap opera.
It does. But Mary Kinsey's analysis grounds us in what Murdoch is actually doing here. This isn't just a dramatic thriller.
No, it's way deeper.
It is a rigorous philosophical investigation into solipsism. Murdoch is using Charles to dissect how human beings construct reality, how we use our own internal magic to manipulate the people around us, and ultimately the agonizing, almost unbearable process required to actually look at the truth of ourselves.
Okay, let's look at the immediate environment Charles chooses for this supposed redemption. He moves to Shrough End. And that name alone is incredibly heavy.
Oh, totally. Mary Kinsey points out the etymology in her introduction.
Yeah, she says shruff is an old word referring to metallic refuse.
Yeah, metallic refuse, dross, or like the kind of ragged scrub wood that you'd use for kindling. Yeah. And it sits at an end.
An end of the line.
Exactly. So Charles has literally positioned himself at the edge of the world, surrounded by waste and refuse.
And the house itself feels actively hostile. I mean, he describes it as drafty. There's this unnerving, sticky yellow and black wooden bead curtain hanging on the landing.
Yeah, and it clicks and clatters when there's no wind at all.
Which is just so creepy. It suggests these unseen presences.
And then there's the sea outside. It is not a calming, gentle tide. It's this roaring, aggressive, deadly force that's just constantly battering the rocks beneath his windows.
So against that backdrop of, hostile nature, Charles sets up his daily routines. He claims he's there to abjure his theatrical magic, to be a hermit, to think about the universe.
Right.
But the diary he writes reveals an operating system that hasn't changed in the slightest. He documents his meals with this fanatical, obsessive precision.
Oh, the meals are fascinating.
They're so weird. He writes paragraphs about how dried apricots eaten with cake must be soaked and simmered first.
But, and this is very important to him, if they are eaten with cheese, they absolutely must be aboriginally dry.
Right. And he details these meager, highly orchestrated meals of, like, frankfurters and plain boiled onions.
Yeah, he treats a boiled onion as if he's choreographing a theatrical masterpiece. Kinsey highlights this as the fundamental contradiction of Charles's project.
How so?
Well, he says he wants to repent of his egoism. But the text he produces is suffocatingly self-absorbed. The entire universe has shrunk down to the exact temperature of his boiled onions.
Wow, yeah.
He fancies himself a modern-day Prospero. Prospero, the great magician from Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Right, the guy who eventually realizes his power is a trap, breaks his staff, drowns his magic book, and just returns to ordinary, flawed humanity.
Exactly. Charles explicitly tells himself that he is doing exactly this. He thinks he's retiring his magic.
But reading his diary, you really don't get the sense of a man relinquishing power at all. You get the sense of a man who is simply directing a play with a cast of one.
Precisely. Kinsey notes that while Charles casts himself as the enlightened Prospero, his behavior aligns him much more closely with Caliban.
The monster.
Yes, the monstrous, earthbound creature who is driven by base appetites and territorial resentment. Charles is not a releaser of souls, he is a hoarder of them.
He hasn't given up his magic or his desire to control. He's merely changed the venue. It makes me think about the mechanics of a black hole.
Yeah.
Is it ever really possible to reinvent ourselves just by changing our zip code?
Usually not.
It's like trying to cure a computer virus by buying a new monitor. The operating system is still infected. Charles believes that by moving to an empty house, he has stopped exerting his gravitational pull on the world.
But a black hole doesn't stop being a black hole just because you remove the planets around it.
Right. The gravity is still there, warping the fabric of space, just waiting for anything to wander too close. Charles's ego is that singularity. The underlying structure of his psychology hasn't shifted an inch.
That is a much more accurate framework for his psychology. And we see that gravitational arrogance most clearly in how he interacts with the natural world around Shruff End.
Oh, with the swimming.
Yes. He finds this sheer cliff near his house that drops into a deep, violently churning pool of water he calls Min's Cauldron.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous.
It's obvious lethality. But despite that, he strips naked and swims in it daily. He actually writes in his journal about acquiring the skills of a merman. He treats these deadly, freezing northern waters with a chilling lack of fear.
And he goes down to the local pub, the Black Lion, and he just sits there sneering at the villagers.
Yeah.
The locals, they know this coast.
Right, they live there.
They tell him the sea's a killer. They warn him about the unpredictable tides, how the rocks offer absolutely no handholds.
They tell him how easily a strong swimmer can be pulled under and smashed to pieces.
And Charles's internal reaction is just sheer hubris. He dismisses them entirely. He believes he is the exception to the rule of nature.
He genuinely thinks the ocean recognizes his superiority and grants him safe passage.
That hubris is the linchpin of his delusion, isn't it?
It really is. Charles believes his life's drama is winding down into this peaceful epilogue entirely under his authorial control. But because he absolutely refuses to examine the rot in his own foundation, the drama cannot end. The internal chaos that he refuses to look at is gathering pressure.
And it's going to force its way into his physical reality. So to understand why this pressure is building, we need to look at a concept that Mary Kinsey places at the very center of her analysis.
Yes, the portrait.
Right. She describes a portrait of Iris Murdoch painted by Tom Phillips. In this portrait, Murdoch is positioned in the foreground, but filling the space right behind her head is a reproduction of a late, incredibly violent painting by the Renaissance master Titian.
It's called The Flaying of Marsyas.
And it's intense.
What's fascinating here is that the inclusion of that painting is essentially the skeleton key to Murdoch's philosophy of art and human development.
The mythological context is crucial here.
Absolutely. Marsyas was a satyr, a creature of the earth, half man, half goat. He discovers a flute and becomes so intoxicated by his own musical talent that he commits the ultimate act of hubris.
He challenges the god Apollo to a musical contest.
Which is never a good idea. Marsyas loses. And the penalty for a mortal challenging a god is brutal. Apollo orders Marsyas to be flayed alive.
It is a harrowing image to look at. Marsyas is hung upside down from a tree, his legs tied to the branches. And Apollo is kneeling right beside him, meticulously peeling the skin away from his flesh.
Yeah, and there's a small dog at the bottom of the canvas lapping up the falling blood. It's a scene of absolute agony.
But Kinsey argues that Murdoch didn't view this as merely a story of divine retribution or, a god punishing an arrogant upstart.
No, Murdoch viewed it as a metaphor for the agonizing ordeal of creation and self-discovery.
Okay, let's slow down here. Unselving.
Right. For Murdoch, true art, and by extension, true moral goodness, can never come from the arrogant assertion of the ego. It requires a process she termed unselving.
Unselving. That implies a destructive act. It's not just about gaining knowledge or becoming smarter. It is about actively dismantling the machinery of who you think you are.
Exactly. Marsyas represents our mortal, animalistic nature, our vanities, our selfish desires, our desperate need to be the center of the universe. The skin being peeled away is the ego itself. Apollo, who is serene and entirely absorbed in his grim task, represents objective divine truth.
He's extracting the spiritual reality from the flawed material husk.
And the process of unselving is excruciating. It's the painful, terrifying ordeal of looking at your own flaws without the protective barrier of your self-justifications.
So Charles Arrowby claims he wants to learn to be good by writing this journal. But he is approaching the task with what Kinsey calls middling sensibilities.
Yes, he wants the aesthetic satisfaction of arriving at wisdom without suffering the agony of the flaying. He refuses the knife entirely.
Right. Charles wants to sit in his drafty house, eat his carefully prepared onions, and write a memoir that polishes his own myth.
He refuses to look at the wreckage of his past, the women he manipulated, the careers he ruined, the sheer scale of his selfishness.
And because he refuses to submit to the ordeal of unselving willingly, the universe, or the demiurge, whatever you want to call it, is going to orchestrate that flaying for him.
Through a series of incredibly violent, chaotic accidents.
Because if the internal pressure of an unexamined life is denied an outlet, it doesn't just evaporate, it hallucinates itself into existence.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the moment where the membrane between Charles's mind and the physical world begins to really rupture. Charles is sitting on the rocks near his house, looking down at a small rock pool, watching a sea worm. He lifts his head to look out at the completely calm, empty ocean. And less than a quarter of a mile away, a monster breaks the surface.
He describes it with this terrifying clinical precision. He sees a black, snake-like form rising 20 or 30 feet out of the water.
Wow.
He notes a long, thickening body with a spiny, ridged back. The neck coils in such a way that he can clearly see the sky through the loops.
That's so specific.
And then he sees the head, a crested snake's head with bright green eyes and a mouth that opens to reveal teeth and a shockingly pink interior.
Then it simply collapses back into the water and is gone. Charles's immediate reaction is to frantically intellectualize it, of course.
Of course. He tries to convince himself it was an optical illusion caused by the light. Or perhaps a delayed LSD flashback from a trip he took back in the 1960s.
He reaches for literally any rationalization that keeps the phenomenon safely outside of his own psychology.
But Kinsey's framework of the unexamined ego demands a very different reading. This sea monster is not a cryptid.
No, it's not the Loch Ness Monster.
It is the physical manifestation of Charles's own ravenous, unchecked subconscious. It is a projection of his voracious jealousy, his predatory nature, and his absolute refusal to unself.
The monstrous reality he refuses to acknowledge inside himself has literally breached the surface of the water to stare back at him.
And the timing of this manifestation is the catalyst for everything that follows.
Right, because almost immediately after hallucinating the embodiment of his own possessiveness, the universe presents him with an object to possess.
It's wild. Charles is walking through the local village and spots an elderly, dowdy woman carrying a shopping bag. And he realizes, with a shock that completely upends his reality, that it is Mary Hartley Smith.
Hartley. This was his childhood sweetheart, the girl he loved when they were teenagers, who abruptly left him and married another man 40 years ago.
He hasn't seen her in 4 decades, and he discovers she is living a quiet, unremarkable life right there in the village with her husband, Ben Fitch.
Now, at this point, you might expect a poignant reflection on aging and lost time. But Charles's ego completely overrides reality. He takes a trip down to London and visits the Wallace Collection, an art museum.
Right.
And he views another painting by Titian, Perseus, and Andromeda.
And the mythological mapping here is critical. Andromeda is the beautiful maiden chained to a rock, offered as a sacrifice to a terrifying sea monster. Perseus is the winged hero who swoops down from the heavens, slays the monster, and claims the maiden. When Charles looks at this painting, he doesn't just appreciate the brushwork.
He uses it as a template to reorganize the facts of his own life.
Exactly. He looks at the fanged mouth of the sea monster in the painting, notes that it looks exactly like the hallucination he saw in the water at Shrough End.
Which is very convenient for him.
Very. And he decides the monster represents Ben Fitch, Hartley's husband. He casts Hartley as the pure, innocent, helpless Andromeda, chained to the rock of a terrible marriage.
And naturally, Charles casts himself as the heroic Perseus, destined to swoop in and enact a glorious rescue.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Kinsey points out the staggering delusion inherent in this Perseus complex. Charles genuinely believes he is the savior. But his psychology is fundamentally predatory. He is actually occupying the roles of both Perseus and the sea monster simultaneously.
Right, because he wants to use the aggressive, dominating force of the hero, but he is driven by the blind, destructive possessiveness of the beast.
Exactly.
The cognitive dissonance he deploys to sustain this fantasy is terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, he's looking at a woman in her 60s. Hartley is tired. She's wearing shapeless clothes. Her face is lined. She has lived an entire complex human life that had absolutely nothing to do with him.
But Charles simply refuses to perceive the woman standing in front of him.
It's as if a director is trying to revive a play 40 years later, forcing the original actors to play teenagers, completely ignoring that they've aged and lived entire lives in the meantime.
That's a great way to put it. He superimposes the image of a pure, unblemished teenage girl directly over her aging body. He obliterates her actual reality.
Because seeing her reality would require acknowledging time, change, and his own irrelevance to her life.
Right. He is still functioning as a theater director. He's taking an unwilling civilian, forcing her into a costume from 40 years ago, and demanding she hit her marks on his stage.
And when she refuses to play the part, the monster fully takes the wheel. Charles manages to lure Hartley to Shrough End.
Under false pretenses, mostly.
Yeah, and she is distressed. She repeatedly tells him she doesn't want to leave her husband. She wants to go back to her house. She is full-on panicking.
And Charles's response is to physically lock her inside an oppressive, claustrophobic inner room on the upper floor of his house.
It is a kidnapping, plain and simple.
It is, but listen to how he justifies it in his diary. He writes that he must keep her there, quote, "In the teeth of all the evidence, we belong to each other."
Wow.
That phrase, "in the teeth of all the evidence," is the ultimate manifesto of the solipsist.
Because evidence, reality, her tears, her panic, her stated desires, none of it matters against the overwhelming weight of his own internal narrative.
Right. He decides her marriage has brainwashed her, and therefore his imprisonment of her is actually a liberation.
He literally chains Andromeda to the rock in his own house, becoming the exact monster he delusionally believed he was saving her from.
It's incredibly dark, and once he commits this act of absolute tyrannical control, the gravity of his black hole reaches its maximum pull.
Things just spiral completely out of control.
Because while he is holding this terrified woman captive upstairs, the isolation of Shrough End shatters entirely.
It's as if his extreme gravitational pull suddenly drags every unresolved orbit of his past right to his front door.
The house becomes a theater of ghosts. A bizarre throng of Londoners descends upon the property.
Who shows up?
Well, we see the arrival of his former lover, Lizzie, her new companion, a character actor named Gilbert, a fiery, dramatic actress named Rosina, whom Charles previously stole from her husband, and that very husband, Peregrine, who arrives brimming with unresolved vengeance.
They all just converge on this remote, ragged coastline. Now, to understand how disorienting and suffocating this convergence is for the reader, we have to look at how Murdoch constructs the prose here.
Right. Kinsey introduces a brilliant literary concept for this, describing the novel's narrative engine as the interest point of view.
The interest point of view. What does that mean exactly in practice?
Well, it's a psychological trap designed by Murdoch. Because the entire novel is Charles's diary, the reader is locked exclusively inside his head.
So we never get an objective view of any of these arriving characters?
No, never. We only see them through the heavily distorted lens of Charles's libidinal focus, his biases, and his immediate desires. The narrative is entirely dictated by what Charles is interested in at any given second.
Which creates an intense claustrophobia for the reader. We are trapped in the mind of a man Kinsey describes as a king of shadows.
Yes.
He wants all of these people orbiting him. He needs to be the sun in their solar system. But what happens when the planets start interacting with each other, independent of the sun's gravity?
Oh, he finds it utterly intolerable. There is a deeply revealing sequence involving his ex-lover Lizzie and the actor Gilbert.
Yeah, let's talk about them.
Both of them are aging, both have been historically mistreated and discarded by Charles, and yet they have managed to form a gentle, supportive, entirely platonic bond with each other. Gilbert tries to explain it to Charles. He refers to it as a kind of cosmic, sex-attender, conversational search for happiness that transcends physical mechanics.
They've basically found peace by talking through their past traumas, which inherently includes talking about Charles.
Exactly. And how does Charles react to this beautiful, healing human connection?
With visceral, venomous disgust.
He calls it perfectly loathsome. He zeroes in entirely on the fact that they discussed him behind his back.
Which is so telling. Have you ever known someone who doesn't want to play with a toy, but the second someone else picks it up, they throw a tantrum?
Yes, exactly.
That's Charles, but with human lives.
Yeah.
He does not want Lizzie. He threw her away years ago. But the absolute second he realizes she has found comfort in an ecosystem that he does not control, his jealousy becomes manic.
He actively threatens to destroy their arrangement. He forces them to separate and reattach themselves to him, miserable but compliant.
He just cannot allow any object in his universe to possess its own independent gravity.
He is a generator of misery. Kinsey actually likens his unchecked impulses to a magical pot of gruel in a dark fairy tale. It just keeps boiling over, pouring out the windows and doors, choking the entire world around it.
And as the chaos inside the house escalates, the boundaries between the psychological and the literal begin to collapse completely.
We see that collapse in a terrifying nighttime encounter with Rosina.
Rosina is the vengeful ex-mistress, right?
Right. And she has been sneaking around Shruff End, smashing his mirrors, breaking his vases. She's acting like a poltergeist to terrorize him. Charles confronts her in the dark hallway, and for a split second, as he looks at her face, he experiences a violent hallucination.
What does he see?
He writes that her face seemed to vanish, becoming a dark hole, and through that hole he saw the crested snake's head, the teeth, and the gaping pink mouth of his sea monster.
Wow. The literal and metaphorical monsters are merging. The external reality of the angry women he has wronged and his own internal terror of his predatory nature are merging into a single monstrous image.
His grip on reality is disintegrating. I mean, he is running a hostage situation upstairs, he is surrounded by hostile actors from his past downstairs, and he is losing the ability to distinguish between his mind and the world.
It is exactly this moment of peak thermodynamic chaos during a sweltering, thundery holiday weekend that a completely different kind of force arrives at Shruff End. Enter Cousin James.
Yes, James Arrowby is the pivot point of the novel's spiritual architecture.
Who is he exactly?
He is Charles's cousin, a retired general who spent years stationed in India and Tibet, and he's deeply immersed in Eastern mysticism.
Okay.
Crucially, James is the one human being on the planet that Charles has been secretly, intensely jealous of his entire life.
Interesting. Why?
Because Charles spent his youth feeling utterly inferior to James's effortless, wealthy grace. His entire theatrical career was, on some level, a desperate attempt to prove he was the superior Arrowby.
Now, Mary Kinsey contrasts these two men by looking at the types of power they wield. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Charles is a false Prospero, using theatrical manipulation and ego, what we might call black magic, to control people.
Right. And James appears to be the real deal. James possesses actual spiritual authority. He practices what he terms white magic, drawing on his extensive training in Tibetan Buddhism and mysticism.
But James immediately undermines that binary, doesn't he?
He does. He gives Charles a profound and unsettling warning. He tells him white magic is black magic.
Wait, I need to push back on that. If the entire thesis of the book is that Charles's ego-driven manipulation of reality is destructive and monstrous, how does James get to be the spiritual authority if he's using magic too? Why is his magic any different if he just slaps the word white on it?
That is exactly the paradox James is trying to communicate to Charles. James is admitting that any use of supernatural power, any attempt by a human consciousness to alter the fabric of reality or control outcomes—
even for good reasons.
Yes, even to save someone, even for seemingly benevolent or white purposes— is inherently tainted by the ego. The very desire to intervene in the karma of the world is an attachment that binds you to the material plane. Magic, by its very nature, is an assertion of the self against the universe.
Yet James intervenes anyway. And the way Murdoch signals his arrival is just fascinating. He doesn't just knock on the door.
No, of course not. Before James even appears on the page, Charles experiences these intense, reality-bending, sensory distortions.
The air in the house suddenly turns brown and granulated, Charles's vision blurs, and he hears a very specific, terrifying sound.
He describes it as the sharp, cracking sound of hyoshigi.
What is that?
The hyoshigi are wooden clappers used in traditional Japanese theater. They are struck together to announce a moment of impending doom or to build unbearable suspense right before a tragedy strikes.
And Charles, as a man of the theater, recognizes the cue instantly. But he is hearing it in his living room.
Kinsey's analysis suggests that James, as a deeply advanced mystic, is actually projecting his presence ahead of his physical body. He's rearranging the sensory molecules of Charles's reality to announce his arrival.
And James isn't just dropping by for a family visit. He is acting in the capacity of a bodhisattva.
Right. To understand the weight of that, we have to look at the Buddhist tradition James is operating within. A bodhisattva is a highly enlightened being who has done the grueling spiritual work, achieved realization, and earned the right to enter nirvana.
To permanently exit the cycle of suffering and rebirth.
Exactly. But out of immense, overwhelming compassion, a bodhisattva deliberately delays their own liberation. They choose to remain in the messy, painful, chaotic material world to help save others who are still drowning in ignorance.
So James loves his deeply flawed, destructive cousin.
He does. He is extending his own earthly limbo specifically to help Charles navigate the disastrous karma he has accumulated.
And James's intervention goes far beyond spiritual advice. It becomes violently, physically real during the climax of the book at Min's Cauldron.
Yes, this is a pivotal scene. Charles goes out to the cliff edge. The sea is raging. The whirlpool is sucking water down with lethal force.
And Peregrine, the husband Charles cuckolded years ago, simply walks up behind Charles and shoves him over the edge.
The sea finally claims him. Charles is thrown into the freezing, churning hole of the cauldron. He is battered against the rocks, dragged beneath the surface, his lungs burning. He is dying.
There is absolutely no natural way for an aging man to survive that water.
But James saves him. And the mechanism of that rescue, as Charles records it in a secret, frantic note to himself later, completely defies physics.
What happens?
Charles writes that James somehow came down the sheer rock face right into the violent water, but he wasn't climbing. Charles says, quote, "One moment he was against the rock as if he were clinging on to it like a bat. Then he was simply standing on the water."
Standing on the water, wow.
James performs a literal, impossible miracle. He burns a massive amount of his accumulated spiritual and physical energy to reach into the cauldron, pull Charles from the whirlpool, and administer the kiss of life.
He uses his white magic to directly override the fatal consequences of Charles's actions.
But the universe is not a theater set. You cannot simply rewrite the script and delete the consequences. Remember James's warning? White magic is black magic.
Right. You cannot cheat the karmic wheel without paying a price.
James expends his energy to save Charles, but Charles fundamentally refuses to undergo the unselving that would make that salvation meaningful.
He survives the drowning, but he remains entirely tethered to his vanity, his ego, and his delusional obsession with keeping Hartley imprisoned.
And because the ego demands fuel, the karmic wheel turns and it demands a different life in exchange.
Which brings us to the devastating arrival of Titus. Titus is Hartley's adopted son. He's 18 years old, beautiful, energetic, and somewhat adrift in the world.
And he tracks Charles down at Shrough End, looking for answers about his mother.
And the moment Charles looks at this young man, he does not see a vulnerable human being. He sees a piece of theatrical machinery.
Right. Charles immediately projects all of his unfulfilled narcissistic paternal fantasies onto the boy. He literally refers to him in the diary as a dream child.
Because Charles calculates that if he can adopt Titus, if he can win the boy's awe and affection with his wealth and fame, Hartley will be psychologically forced to stay with him.
He is using a human life as leverage. He wants the aesthetic glow of being a benevolent patriarch without doing a single ounce of the selfless work required to actually care for a child.
And it is precisely this superficial vanity that triggers the ultimate tragedy of the novel. Titus, full of youthful energy, sees the ocean and immediately wants to swim.
And Charles, desperate to impress this boy, desperate to maintain the illusion that he is still a virile, fearless, heroic figure, takes him to the cliffs above Min's cauldron.
Charles knows exactly how lethal that specific stretch of water is. He knows about the unpredictable undertow. He knows the sheer rock walls offer no escape if the tide turns.
He knows how quickly the freezing water drains a swimmer's strength.
But he stands on the cliff edge next to this 18-year-old boy, and he chooses to say absolutely nothing.
He actively conceals the danger. Why? Because warning the boy would require Charles to admit vulnerability. It would require him to act like a cautious, aging man.
Charles admits it later in his journal, in a rare moment of agonizing clarity. He writes, quote, "I acted out of vanity and out of a silly vicarious pride in his youth. I did not want to spoil my picture of Titus or Titus's picture of me by any mean prudence."
He prioritizes the aesthetic perfection of his own self-image over the physical safety of an innocent life.
And the mechanism of the tragedy is set. On a day when the sea is particularly violent, Titus goes down to the cliff to swim alone. He gets caught in the swell.
He cannot find a handhold on the sheer rock. The waves pull him off again and again. Exhausted, freezing, and terrified, he is finally smashed against the stone and drowns.
So what does this all mean for Charles?
Kinsey's analysis is unsparing here. This death is not a random accident of nature. It is the direct, automatic payment for Charles's faults.
It's a chain of strict causality.
Yes. Because Charles stole Rosina, Peregrine pushed him into the cauldron. Because James had to burn his life force using magic to save Charles, James was utterly exhausted and spiritually depleted.
So he was unable to perform another miracle or give Titus the kiss of life when they finally pull his broken body from the water.
Exactly. Charles's absolute failure to unself directly results in the death of an innocent.
Think about the horrific irony of the Perseus complex here. Charles wanted to be Perseus, saving the youth from the monster.
But instead, he fed the youth to the monster, the sea, purely to protect his own ego.
The illusion violently collapses. The clean, merciful northern sea Charles praised at the beginning is revealed to be a ruthless killer.
The death of Titus permanently shatters any delusional fantasy of a happy ending.
Hartley is completely broken by the loss of her son. She leaves Shroff End, retreating deep into the fortress of her unhappy marriage, forever beyond Charles's reach.
The grand, manipulative play he was directing ends with a corpse on the stage.
And the narrative then shifts away from the stormy, ragged cliffs of Shroff End, moving into the quiet, devastating aftermath back in London. This is the untying of the knots.
Yes, in the postscript of the novel, James dies.
But his death is the absolute antithesis of Titus's chaotic, violent drowning.
It is. James dies peacefully in his London flat. A doctor who attends to him recognizes it as a willed, conscious passing.
The enlightened death of a bodhisattva who has finally completed his grueling earthly task and is willingly detaching from the wheel of suffering.
He has achieved all. And he leaves Charles everything. His flat, his wealth, and his collection of dusty, beautiful jade treasures.
So Charles is left entirely alone in this quiet apartment, surrounded by his cousin's artifacts, sifting through the wreckage.
And what is brilliant about Murdoch's conclusion here is that she absolutely refuses to grant Charles, or the reader, a neat, tied-up ending.
There is no grand speech of total redemption.
No. Charles writes, quote, "Human arrangements are nothing but loose ends and hazy reckoning."
But the ordeal of the flaying has left the mark, hasn't it? Charles's vision has subtly, painfully shifted.
He looks back at his obsession with Hartley and finally sees her as she is, broken, frowsy, a husk.
He realizes that his grand obsessive love for her was nothing but a useless machine, engines roaring with no actual work to do in reality.
And in a moment of profound, quiet heartbreak, he realizes he was looking in the wrong direction his entire life.
He writes, quote, "I remembered that James was dead. Who is one's first love? Who indeed?
He finally recognizes that the cousin she resented, the man whose grace he spent a lifetime competing with, might have been his one true love, his first love.
And as the deep dive comes to a close, Murdoch leaves us with one final haunting image. It happens at dawn. Charles is back at Shrough End for a brief moment, standing on the rocks, looking out over a completely still, glossy ocean. He hears a soft splashing.
He looks down, and 4 seals have swum right up to the edge of the rock.
They lift their heads, looking at him with what he describes as wet, doggy faces and bright, inquisitive eyes.
It is a breathtaking moment of sudden grace.
It really is. After hundreds of pages of Charles projecting monsters into the water, after all his attempts to dominate nature and manipulate human beings, the natural world offers him a moment of pure connection.
A connection that he didn't orchestrate or manipulate. The seals are simply there. They exist entirely outside of his control.
They visit him, look at him, and he feels, for a fleeting second, blessed.
It's a glimpse of the profound reality that reveals itself only when the loud, demanding machinery of the ego goes completely silent.
But because Iris Murdoch is fundamentally realistic about human psychology, she does not let the book end on that pristine note of enlightenment.
Almost immediately, Charles undercuts the moment in his journal. He notes wryly that life just limps on, undoing conversions.
The grace fades. He goes back inside, starts fussing over his unpacked books, worrying about his jade collection, obsessing over his things. The dust settles back over his life.
Because the unselving is never a finished project. The dance of Marsyas does not end.
Right. As long as we are alive, the ego will constantly attempt to rebuild its defenses.
Enlightenment isn't a permanent state. It's a momentary clearing of the fog that requires constant, agonizing maintenance. The ego always creeps back in.
Let's draw this all together. The sea is a masterful, terrifying look at the stories we tell ourselves to justify our selfishness.
Charles Arrowby thought he was escaping the artificiality of the theater by fleeing to the sea, only to realize he was forcing everyone in the real world to act in a play he was directing.
He thought he was the hero of the myth, but the monster was inside him all along.
It serves as a stark warning to all of us about the danger of the interest point of view in our own lives.
It really demands that we interrogate the lenses through which we view the people around us.
Exactly. Are we allowing them to exist as complex, independent realities, or are we just casting them as supporting characters in the movie playing inside our own heads?
That is the thought we want to leave you with today. Look at the architecture of your own life. When you interact with the people you love, are you truly seeing them, or are you just projecting your own unresolved history, your own needs, and your own unacknowledged fears onto them?
Are you Perseus, or are you the dragon?
If your mind were to suddenly project its deepest, most unexamined flaws into the physical world right now, what kind of monster would rise out of the water to greet you?